Welcome to Professor Game Podcast, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who brings the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration that help us in the process of getting the students to learn what we teach. And I'm Rob Alvarez. I teach and work at IE Business School in Madrid, where we create interactive and engaging learning materials. Want to know more? Go to professorgame.com/subscribe, start on our email list, and ask me anything. And engagers, we are back with another episode of Professor Game Podcast, and today we have Joe with us. Joe, are you prepared to engage?
I am. Thanks for having me here, Rob.
Joe Slack actually is a professional board game designer and author of the #1 international best-selling book, The Board Game Designer's Guide, along with 2 other books on game design. So you definitely know why he is together with us today. And he has also taught game design and development at Wilfrid Laurier University and runs the Board Game Design course. It is an online course for new game designers, and he has many games at various stages from development to publication, including his own successful Kickstarter campaign for his solo adventure game, Relics of Rajavihara. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that even close to the right thing. Sounds good. So, Joe, is there anything that we didn't catch in that intro? Anything else you would like to add?
No, just glad to be here and glad to answer some questions and help your listeners.
Absolutely. I'm sure the engagers will get great value from having Joe Slack, the crazy board game guy, as your Twitter handle tells us. So, Joe, we always get started with a very light question, which is we'd like to know what your days look like. What are you doing these days? How do you organize, if you do at all, your days?
For sure. Yeah, I like to be organized. I like to have a plan of attack. I do it more so on a weekly basis. Here's all the things that I want to get accomplished, and then try to lay out what I want to do each day. And, quite often, you don't get everything done in a day and it carries over. But generally what I do is I try to spend about 45 minutes to an hour each morning fairly early on doing some writing. So I have my own blog and I write books, as you've mentioned. So whatever it is that I'm writing at that time, I try to dedicate that time to either writing or editing time. So I always make sure that I'm keeping up with things and not falling behind. I always have lots of content to share. And then I get right into my day with whatever the task is of the day. It could be something, for example, right now I'm doing a lot of work towards my Kickstarter campaign that successfully completed this summer. So just, going back and forth with the manufacturer on little things, working on print and play files, that type of thing. Or it could be working on some games that I'm designing right now or co-designing, conversing with co-designers, pitching to publishers, whatever it is I happen to have as the top priority for the moment. I'm just working on all those things throughout the day.
Sounds like many exciting things are happening all the time with you, Joe. So that is amazing stuff that is going on. And after these kinds of questions, now that we have sort of a vibe of who you are, what you're doing, what's your days, we also like to come in strong as well. And it's especially with this question of failure or fail, first attempt in learning. We would like to know of a story of a time when, as you probably know, I'm sure you do, game design and board game design as well is all about testing and trying and failing and, getting back up from that. So we want to be there with you in a story of a time this happened. And of course, how did you get out of it? What did you learn? We want to be there and learn right side along you.
For sure. So as any game designer has experienced, I've had lots of failures. No game ever comes out perfectly and just runs as smoothly as it would in your mind, right? You put it out in front of people and it fails, and then you make changes to make it better and better and better, and hopefully it gets to that point where it becomes a great game. But my experience would really be, the one story that I would tell would be with the first game I ever created, which is going back about 6, almost 7 years ago now. I was playing a lot of party games with my friends at the time. It was just before I kind of got into modern board gaming, and we were playing games like Cards Against Humanity and that type of thing. And I thought, well, the game was fun at first, but then, quickly became, okay, there's a lot of like trump cards that always win. There's, it's funny at first. And then, okay, yeah, I've heard that joke already a couple times. So what if I could create something that was like that, but a little bit more of an experience where all the players are contributing something, using their own creativity? It would be a lot more replayable and that type of thing. So I came up with a game, and it eventually became known as Cunning Linguistics. And it was a party game, and you kind of have some prompts, and then you write in your own answers to questions, that type of thing. And, played it with friends a little bit, and it was fun and everything, but didn't really know the whole game design process at that time. So I slowly started to learn that, and I brought in a friend to help me work on the game because he knew a little bit more about board games and had been playing modern board games longer than I had at that point. And we were working on the game, and we thought, well, what do we want to do with this? And we thought, well, Kickstarter, that's the obvious choice for something like this, especially something that, a publisher might not want to pick up because it might be just a little too risque. Our game wasn't like Cards Against Humanity in that way. You could play it, calmly and rationally with your family, or you can go right outside the box and be a little risque. But we decided we were going to do that, and we waffled about it a lot. We said, okay, we're going to go and do it, and then we're like, oh, but this looks like a lot of work. Oh, yeah, okay, we're going to go ahead and do it. And we kind of went back and forth a little bit whether or not we wanted to do it. And eventually, I just said, you know what? How can we lose? Okay, we've got everything done. Like, we had a friend that did like the graphic design for it and everything. And we had the gameplay all done. We had play tested it lots. People liked it in general. We're like, we'll put it out there. If it fails, it fails. But at least we will learn from the experience. Because if we don't ever do it, we won't ever learn. We won't ever know. And we put it out there, and it failed. We didn't build nearly enough following. That was the biggest thing. And I had always heard build a following, but we didn't do enough of that. And we launched, and it was very slow start and didn't really go anywhere. And learn from that very quickly. Okay, what they're saying is absolutely right, and I got to figure out a way to build that audience. I can't just rely on the few people that played it here and there and whatnot. Like, you got to get out there, get the game out to as many people as you can, let people know about it, talk about it, get people excited. So on day one, you're gonna fund as quickly as possible, hopefully. So that was my big learning experience, and I used a lot of that, as well as being the designer on a couple other games that got published through that went through Kickstarter and got published. Working with the publisher and learning a bit from them, and seeing what they did right, seeing the mistakes that they did, and learning and understanding how to build a following, which is what I did for my most recent game, Relics of Rajavihara, and had success because I focused so much on that.
That sounds amazing. And of course, build a following is something that is very important, especially for something, if it's a game you're going to sell and so on. And is there like any tips you can give the audience on what you did? Of course, quick tips. I know you have a full course on these kinds of things, but any quick tips that you can give away?
For sure. I think like everybody says this online, build a following, and everybody's like, yeah, well, what does that mean? How do I go about doing that? And nobody wants to get really specific. So I'll give a few specific examples. I'd say the first thing is, really get to know who your audience is. That's first and foremost, because you don't want to be, spending time and advertising this and doing so much in front of people who are not going to be your audience, who are not going to buy your game. So figure out exactly who your audience is, like what type of game it is. Is it a party game? Is it a family game? What is it? Who's your audience? And then figure out where your audience goes. Where do they like to hang out? Are they on Facebook a lot? Are they on Instagram? Do they hang out on Twitter? Do they go to conventions? Do they, just hang out at friends' places and play games? Like, learn as much as you can about them, and then go and kind of target and get involved in that community. And I wouldn't say just like go in there and say, hey, look at my game, here's my game. But, way beforehand, like even 8 to 12 months before you're even planning on releasing it, when you're just getting everything ready and you're building towards it, get in those groups. Like, for example, with Relics of Rajavihara, it's a solo game. And I knew there were some really good Facebook groups dedicated to solo gaming. There's about 4 or 5 different ones, and one is about 20,000 members plus strong and very active community. So I got in there and I talked to people in there. I commented on posts. I made my own posts about, games that I was playing, solo games, that type of thing, like way before I even started talking about my own game. And then when, there's a little bit of trust, there's a little bit of familiarity there, people kind of knew me, I knew them, then I could start to say, oh, I'm working on my own solo game as well. I'd love to hear your feedback. Like, one of the first things I did was a poll, and I said, here's my game, here's my idea, here's some pictures of what it looks like, but I'm trying to figure out what the best theme is. I'm thinking, like, should it be like an NES style, pixelated kind of game? Should it be an adventure style like Indiana Jones, or should it be, this other style? And I got people to vote, and they were very strongly in favor of like the Indiana Jones adventure kind of style. And I ran with that. And then as I was doing that, I was, showing art and things like that for the game, engaging the community about different things, saying, oh, I got a print and play. Is anybody willing to try it? And just all those little steps that you can do, to get into a community first, get to know the other people, and then start talking about your game. That works a lot better than just going in your first post, just talking about talking about your game. Don't make it about yourself. Make it about getting involved in the community first, and then build on that and get people interested. And you don't even have to like post links to your landing page right away, or to your your Kickstarter sign up page, but just start talking about it. And then naturally people are going to be like, oh, this looks really cool. I really like the art. Where can I find out more? And then in the comments, then you can start to answer that. So it doesn't feel as like spammy. It feels more genuine because people are asking you. And when they ask you, they've given you permission to say, here's where you can go for more. And people will see that. So those are a few of like the first steps that I do, as well as providing print and plays and building a landing page and driving people towards that to sign up and giving them an incentive to sign up, like a print and play, insights into the game, behind the scenes kind of thing, anything that they're going to be interested in.
That sounds fantastic. It sounds amazing. And of course, you were saying about the comment when somebody asks, of course, that means they're interested. And that's the person you want to be targeting. You don't want to spray and pray and see who of those people might be maybe interested and see you as salesy. Or versus what you were suggesting, which sounds amazing, which is, if somebody asks, that is a fantastic, a beautiful opportunity to actually lead them into whatever they're asking for, which probably has to do with your landing page, Kickstarter campaign, and so on. So that's great advice. Thank you very much for that, Joe.
No problem.
And of course, it is not all about failure. We also like to talk and celebrate success, because I know you've had quite a few. So we would like to hear a story of that. Like, how did it go? Like we want to live that success with you and learn from, maybe one or two things that you could attribute that success to.
Sure. Yeah. So I'd like to say that Relics of Rajavihara was a success for many reasons. I couldn't pinpoint just, one thing. But I think, building that community, getting involved in that solo group, because I knew that would be, a good portion of my audience, talking with other people who like solo games and talking to them about, games that other games, not just my games, but other published games, and talking to them about, even making a post like one day saying like, oh, I've got the afternoon off. Here's like my list of solo games. Which should I play? And then, people interact in the poll and that kind of thing. But, going back to that, in terms of building, having a good landing page with a reason for people to sign up, I think was really key to that. But one of the successes came because I, engaged in the community, built it up, gave it time. I didn't rush it at all. I, gradually gave things back to people, showing them a little bit about, what the game's about, getting them engaged, getting them asking questions, getting them to, join the Facebook group, getting them to, sign up for the notifications. And it was really when I saw, the number of notifications, or like people signed up for the notifications, that going up, and people engaging in comments and things like that. That's when I could see that it looked like it could be successful. And, being very, very present on that first day, launching, having ads run ahead of time, sharing with everybody that I could, getting on podcasts, doing all those little things to, keep getting engaged, keep people interested and coming back for more on the page.
That sounds fantastic. Those are some very key elements if you want to make sure you want to have the best chances of success, at least, right?
Yeah.
It's not always going to be a hit and home run, but there's many times where you can do all these things to help improve your chances, which I guess is the best thing that we can do. Understanding all these things. I don't know how you feel about. Well, actually, we'll get into that in a bit. Is there, like, when you're designing a board game, right, which is definitely your specialty? Is there any sort of process, any sort of steps in general? How do you approach that? You say, well, I'm going to build a board game. Where do you, I don't know, come with inspiration? How do you do that?
Well, some people take the approach, and I always hear this question: do you start with theme or do you start with mechanics? And I don't necessarily start with either of those things. I like to start with a vision and a player experience that I want to give. So I might say, for example, I want people to feel a real sense of, being chased, being hunted down. And I'm working on a co-design right now, a real-time co-op game that really invokes that. It feels like you're being chased down, kind of thing. Or for Relics of Rajavihara, I want people to really feel really clever when they've solved the puzzle. When they've been sitting there and they've tried it, 5 or 6 times, and then finally something just clicks, and they figure out, oh, I got to do this first before I do all these things, and then they solve the puzzle and move on to the next level. It gives them that feeling of accomplishment. So I like to always try to start with, what the player is going to be experienced. What kind of feelings do I want them to have? And then build around that and say, well, what kind of theme really goes with this? What kind of mechanics would go with that? And, not every game starts exactly that way. Sometimes it's simply a matter of, an idea pops into my head. A name, something somebody says, and I'm like, oh, that could be a game. And I just write that down. And I think, okay, how could I turn this, idea, this phrase into a game? What would it look like? What would players do? What would they want to feel in that? But yeah, I generally start with kind of the feeling of it, and then try to wrap my head around what mechanics or mechanics and theme really work well with that. And then, of course, as you're playtesting, you're going to find, okay, that mechanic didn't work so well, or this one works better with this combination with something else. And then just keep tweaking and then making the game better. Just getting a whole bunch of feedback through playtests, through blind playtests, to see what's going to actually work and what players like about your game, and then try to trim out the things that players don't like about your game. Get to the fun faster, get to the engaging parts quicker, and make much more of that, and try to take out as many of the little frustrating bits and pieces in the game so they can have a more fun and engaging experience.
That sounds amazing. And talking about like sort of picking those, for example, those game mechanics, you've already decided how you want to make people feel. That's the first thing you go for. You're probably then getting into the theme or the mechanics. How do you go about that? Like, how do you say, well, there's all these, you can go into Gamma Sutra and find, hundreds or thousands even of game mechanics, or maybe even invent one. Is there any way to wrap your head around this?
Sure. Every game is a little different, but sometimes an idea for a mechanic is already kind of there. Like for instance, I had a game called Flight from Dr. Demented's Lab, and that was the real-time co-op game. And I thought, like it had to be really quick, and you had to make quick decisions and do things. So there have to be things you can do very quickly. And I started off with dice rolling for it. So you just had to roll, and you had to roll different combinations, keep picking them up and keep rolling it. So it's something that would really work with something really speedy that you have to accomplish. And then when you accomplish it, you can move on and open up a new room, that kind of thing. That one eventually, we changed it because it felt a little bit too much like Escape Curse of the Temple, which a game that I hadn't experienced until after I came up with that idea, and like a few other games as well. So we changed it to more of a puzzly kind of mechanic where you're having to solve these little puzzles and that kind of thing. So sometimes it's just a little bit of trial and error. You might have an idea for what you think is going to work, and it may or may not work. It may or may not be the best idea. And then you have to be unafraid of pivoting and changing if that's not quite working or not quite giving the right experience. In other cases where, I want to make it like an engine builder or things like that, then I think, well, how are they going to be able to build their engine? How am I going to be able to make cards so that they're able to do the things they need to do and build it up kind of slowly over time, and then have this really strong engine building by that time? Or if it's a matter of trying to make people feel clever, well, what do people feel clever when they do? One example is puzzles, and that really fits well with Relics of Rajavihara. If you figure out that kind of puzzle and then you move on, and it's kind of that legacy aspect, or almost like a video game, you beat a level, you move on to the next level. So people have that kind of familiarity with that kind of approach of beating one level and moving on to the next one, but also the cleverness of sort of solving a puzzle. So if you can have like puzzly aspects, that will usually make somebody feel clever. And if you want to do something, for example, that's more like a push your luck, there are certain mechanics that kind of, work well with that, whether it's, dice rolling or, pulling something, drawing things from a bag, that type of thing. Or like in the case of like a game like Ink and Gold, you hit two obstacles and you lose all your progress that round, that kind of thing. So, there's kind of a build up to that, and you have to make that choice. So I think there's certain mechanics that generally work well with different kind of feelings you're trying to get across. So it's just looking at experiences from different games that you've played and that you've seen, other games you might have been working on. Quite often it'll be, you're working on a game and it's not working out, but then you work on a new one. You say, oh, I can steal that idea from this other one that I had been, it's on the shelf right now. And maybe this will solve this problem. So it's just kind of getting more experience, using your experience from games you've played and from designing, and you kind of get quicker about kind of figuring out what's going to work, and then just testing it out and trying and not being afraid to pivot and change.
That sounds fantastic. Just a quick break before we continue with this episode. If you've been enjoying this podcast, I would really appreciate if you share it with your friends and family and on social media. On Twitter and Instagram, it's @RobAlvarezB and the hashtag ProfessorGame, all one word. And in Facebook, you can find the Professor Game page. Thanks in advance for your engagement. And Joe, we just talked about, your process. So is there any sort of, I don't want to call it because it's not like the golden mechanic. That's definitely not what we're after. But is there some sort of best practice? Something that when you're designing, where you're creating, a playful activity, some board games, and, when you're doing game design in general. So is there some sort of best practice, something that you would sort of recommend people to do when they're in these processes?
I would say just the most important thing is get the idea out of your head as quickly as possible and onto the table. So whether that's grabbing some dice and components from another game that's already in your shelf, whipping up some quick cards, just drawing up a quick board, whatever you need to do, but just making sure the process is as quick as possible. Make a minimum viable prototype, an MVP, and test it out. You may have this grand idea about a game that's going to have 400 different cards, and they're each going to have different art and different values and everything. But you don't need 400 cards to test to see if that idea is even viable. You just need maybe 10 or 20 cards. Put it out in front of yourself, and just try it on your own before you even put it in front of anybody else. Just come up with a basic idea, a small sample of the cards or a small board, whatever you need, put them in front of you and try, taking a couple turns and seeing if this is something that's engaging or interesting. And then just tweak as you go. You might find, I've got way too many things in front of me to choose from. Okay, let's narrow down the scope. Maybe it's just 3 cards to choose from. Maybe it's, not rolling a die. Maybe it's, doing something else, bag building or deck building or something like that. And just continuously trying to tweak and figure out what's the most fun parts of your idea or most engaging parts of your idea, and what parts just are not going to work. And then just quickly make those iterations and changes. I think it's all about getting it out of your head, onto the table, testing it and making changes quickly. Because I hear too many people, new game designers or soon to be game designers who talk about, they have this idea for a game. And then, you talk to them 6 months later, how's that game coming? I haven't really worked on it or whatnot. Like you won't know if it works or not until you put it on the table and try it out. And once you've done that, you've taken a step that, a lot of people haven't even gotten to. And you're much, much further ahead than a lot of people who just have that idea in their head that they'll never get out and, they'll never actually design a game. So just get it to the table and try it out.
So the most important thing, as you're saying, and I completely agree, is getting to do it. Get something out, get something and test it out, try it out, do it yourself, and do something to see how it goes. That would be the first approach, and makes a lot of sense. And talking about these recommendations, is there anybody, like, after listening to these questions, sort of the vibe of the podcast, is there somebody that you would like to listen to in an interview like this one on Professor Game?
The one person I'd love to hear from more is Rainer Knizia. He has so many amazing games out there, and I just love to learn more and more about his process, because as I understand it, he just, spends most of his time designing games, and he has somebody who actually does sort of the pitching aspect that, talks to publishers and that kind of thing. So he can concentrate on game design. And I just love to hear his process, because he has so many amazing games and he's so prolific.
That sounds fantastic, like a fantastic recommendation. And in that same sense of recommendations, I know you have at least those 3 books, and there's more to come, and definitely those are some to have on the library. But right next to your books, is there any other book you would like to recommend to the engagers? What book would that be, and why?
Sure. I've got lots of great books on game design and, the game and toy industry and that on my shelf. But I think the one that stands out a little bit more than the others is Jesse Schell's book, which is the, I'm going to forget the name here, but it's talking about the book of lenses. It's not called that. It's
the Art of Game Design.
Yes,
Jesse Schell.
Art of Game Design. The book of lenses is his separate app, or the separate component you can kind of get, which is more of a deck of cards that you can shuffle, or an app that you can search through and randomize and look at games from different lenses. Yeah, but the Art of Game Design, I would say, is a fantastic fantastic book to check out.
It is fantastic, definitely. And if you want to check out Jesse Schell as well, there is an episode on the podcast with Jesse as well. He is absolutely great. So complete recommendation for sure. And when creating, board games, when doing game design, what would you say is your superpower, Joe? What would you say is that thing that you do that probably, comes out naturally or better to you than most other people?
Well, I think part of it comes from my background. So I have a strong background in math and statistics. That's what I did my degree in at university. And I've always, from a young age, just loved, math and working with numbers and that kind of thing. So I think the one thing that comes to me fairly naturally, maybe more than some people, would be understanding kind of like the balance of numbers and values and economies and that type of thing. That tends to come to me fairly easily when I'm coming up with a game and I'm thinking, okay, well, how many points should these cards be worth? What's kind of the risk reward? Okay, this card or this play that somebody can make is more risky. So there's less chance of it succeeding, but if they do succeed, they should get a higher reward, for example. So what are kind of those values? What are those numbers? How do you balance it? And how do you make sure that the whole economy of the game makes sense? So there's, no cards or powers that are completely overpowering, and nothing's super undervalued and that kind of thing. So I think kind of that natural, tendency to figure out the balance and the numbers within a game kind of comes fairly naturally to me.
That is very, very useful and very, very important as well. So kudos for that, Joe.
Oh, thanks.
Definitely. And this is a hard question. This is probably one of the ones that our guests have a harder time with because we enjoy games very much. So picking a favorite game is really, really difficult. But Joe, what would you say is your favorite game?
That is super hard, and I don't know if I can give you one particular answer. I will say a couple things here. The game that got me into modern board gaming, which has a certain place in my heart, rather, not necessarily the number one game for me, but Pandemic was the game that got me into modern board gaming. So it holds a special place in my heart for sure. Aside from that, a couple other games that I really, really enjoy. I've really been into cartographers lately, playing both solo and multiplayer. And Azul is one that I've keep coming back to and could play just about any time as well. But there are so many amazing games out there that it's really, really hard to pick just one.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. And in fact, two of those games, Azul and Pandemic, are in my stack. So I definitely enjoy those two for sure. And since we have, a little bit more of time, every now and then we get the chance to make these random questions that come from the audience. So I'm going to pick randomly one of these questions that, of course, was pre-selected to make sure it makes sense for our guest today. Okay, so this one right here. Okay, so this person is saying, I'm already creating games for entertainment, right? So would it make sense to go into designing sort of custom-made games for a purpose? So just maybe not just for entertainment, but for, I'd say education or for the environment or something like that. This is me speaking, not the question. And of course, if you have any insights on how to go through this, if you would recommend doing that kind of thing.
Sure, and I think there's room for games just about anywhere. Game-based learning. Different approaches to things, education. There's so many opportunities out there. I definitely see a lot of teachers, for example, wanting to use games and using games more in their curriculum and their teaching. My wife's a teacher and she loves to use games. She's used, some of my games, some of our published games off our shelf. I've gone into classrooms and, showed students how I go about kind of making games. I've helped classes with, that are making games themselves. And I've even created games for different curriculums for different classrooms and subjects where I've gone in, created a game based on what the teacher said that their need was. It could be, pulleys and levers. It could be about the formation of the rock cycle, topics that you think are, kind of boring, not very exciting, and, come up with a game that, really works well and engages the students, whether it's in reinforcing the learning or teaching the learning. I think there's a lot of opportunities there to teach through games because, whether you're a kid, whether you're an adult, you're going to be more engaged in something that's interesting, that you're involved in, learning in that way rather than just, hearing a boring lecture, that kind of thing. So definitely in like the educational space, there's huge opportunities there. I've also heard there's a lot of opportunities in the nonprofit as well as kind of corporate side, business side. When I was working at Wilfrid Laurier University, our motto was games that change the world. And that's what we were encouraging students to do. So part of the course curriculum and their assignments were around identifying a business in their community and figuring out, one of their needs, and then coming up with a game. And it could be any kind of game. We're like, that course in that curriculum was really talking about any kind of game, whether it was tabletop, video game, LARP, hybrids, RPGs, whatever the case may be. But there were so many great opportunities, and I saw students come up with so many great ideas for, coming up with a game for, the YMCA or YWCA, or for, a local business and that kind of thing. Whether it was something related to training or sales, safety, exercise, whatever the case may be. There are so many opportunities out there. And like you mentioned, environment as well. That's a great way to learn about, climate change and that type of thing through game-based learning and that type of thing. And, one project that I'm working on, it's very much in the back burner, unfortunately, at this time, with kind of schools in the situation that they're in, and I wouldn't be able to go and visit. But I would love to come up with a game, or further develop, rather, the idea that I have of teaching students about the experience of explorers coming to North America and the impact on the First Nations people, and telling it more from a perspective so that students, kind of by the end of the game, they get a full feeling of what it was like, the impact, if they were playing the role of the First Nations people. Because, we always talk about, the explorers, and, they've explored so much and gained so much as a result, and survived because of the First Nations people. But nobody really looks to see kind of the perspective of the First Nations people, how it impacted them, how it impacted their culture, the sicknesses that they had and everything. So it would be more of a game where it's not going to be a fun and entertaining and that kind of experience where you're going to get to the end and say, oh, wow, that was so fun. But more so, you're going to get to the end and say, oh, wow, like, look at the devastating impact of, certain choices that were made, and, the explorers that came in, and, perhaps some situations where, they were taken advantage of and that kind of thing, and what happened as a result. So basically, at the end of the game, there's not going to be a winner. Everybody's going to lose if you're playing as like the First Nations, but you're going to have a way better understanding and empathy, hopefully, for the First Nations people and what they went through as a result.
That sounds amazing, and definitely there are many opportunities in that world. In fact, one of our main targets, so to speak, one of our main groups within the engagers are people who are using games in any way, in any fashion, in education and in learning. That could be corporate learning, it could be in higher ed, that could be in K through 12. I think there are many opportunities for this, and I would say, like, if it were me, I would definitely go for it. At least give it a try, see how it goes. See what impact you can do in the world as well, because of course you want to make sure your games are out there. You want to make sure of course you earn a living, because you're probably trying to make a living out of this. But also, that footprint that you leave behind, you want it to be definitely a positive one, and see how games can make an impact in the world. There's many things that games are capable of doing. So thank you very much for that answer, Joe. It was fantastic. And of course, before we let you go, if you have any final piece of advice, that would be fantastic. But otherwise, we want to make sure we know where to find your books, where to find you. I know you have a board game design course, all these things. Where that call to action, if you will, where can we find more about Joe and his work?
Sure. So first of all, the only other thing I would say is, just to reiterate what I said, if you have an idea for a game, if you want to create a game, do it. Ideas, are great to a point, but unless you actually take action on them, you won't see the results. You won't see, if this, game is a real experience, if it is something that could be viable. And, you owe it to other people out there to actually make this game and to, deliver it to the world. If you've got a great game in your head, everybody should have, the opportunity to play it and see it and experience that. So that's the one piece of advice I would give. And if you're looking for more information on me or about my course, you can check out boardgamedesigncourse.com. I've got all the information there. I've got blogs that you can read, a couple years worth of blogs on various different subjects, everything from designing a game to Kickstarter and everything in between. And I've got links to my books there. If you're interested, I've got 3 books, and the course as well, where you can learn how to design games from A to Z.
Absolutely. That sounds fantastic. Thank you very much, Joe, for investing this time together with us to give all these insights to the engagers. Hopefully they'll find, as well as I did, a lot of value, a lot of insights into your experience, everything you've told us today. However, at least for now and for today, it is time to say that it's game over. Engagers, it is fantastic to have you around because this podcast really makes sense with you. So let's connect on Twitter. That way we can be connected, you can exchange views, we can have ideas, we can have conversations. I can help you with things, hopefully, as well. You can find my Twitter account on professorgame.com/Twitter. I'm always sharing content about gamification, game-based solutions, game-based learning, especially, as you know, my passion around education and learning. And hey, don't click continue yet. Remember to subscribe if you haven't using your favorite podcast app and listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there.